something interesting is sure to happen. Well, I think you ought to tell me who you are first. Mr. Rabbit? Then why did you ask the question?
Goodness, this is quite extraordinary.
Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?
But today is turning into the most curious adventure I have ever had.
Welcome to the Alice in Wonderland podcast. I'm Georgia Ellis, and I want to remind everyone that this is a place for you to open your mind, let your sense of wonder, imagination, and most importantly, curiosity loose. So today I am joined by Justen Lee. So Justen and I met in Santa Cruz back in February this year, so 2019. And we were chatting about our businesses just over, I think it might have been over a cheeky glass of wine or something, I can't quite remember. And Justen shared his remarkable transformation from addict to health, wellness, and recovery coach. And I was so inspired by his story and his journey. And the person that I had in front of me was just so inspiring and full of energy that I wanted to bring his story to the world. So let's get curious. Welcome, Justen.
Hey there, Georgia. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm really excited for today.
Yeah, I'm really excited too because I don't know what rabbit holes we're going to go down with you today, but I'm super pumped to share your journey and your story of remarkable transformation with people, because I think it will help people, inspire people to see that there is always light at the end of the tunnel. It just depends on how far down the tunnel you are, I guess, or the rabbit hole, for want of a better term. So one of the questions I ask all my guests, Justen, is to imagine that I am a 7-year-old girl and I'm skipping my way through Wonderland, and I bump into Justen. Justen's just having a leisurely walk through Wonderland, maybe smelling some flowers or something. I don't know what you're doing. Yep, just walking along, and I bump into you and I say, Mr. Lee, what do you do in this world? What are you doing in Wonderland? Why are you here? How would you answer that?
Why am I here in Wonderland? I mean, I definitely think that's a big question that we're all trying to find out. And I think that when it comes down to it, you know what I mean? Like, the only things that we know about this world is that, like, you know, we're born and that we're going to die. And everything else is kind of speculation. And it's really about, I feel like, making meaning and creating meaning out of this world, and making meaningful relationships, and just finding ways to grow and expand and explore. And kind of the fact that we're here, and that we're given breath, we're given life, we're given a body, that alone is kind of enough for me to really want to explore that and kind of see where it all goes, you know, and just uncover some mysteries, I guess, if you want to put it in pretty broad terms.
Yeah, awesome. So tell us, now that we know why you're here to, you know, live the human experience, to shorten your answer, what is it that you do day to day? What's your world look like?
Day to day, I do a few different things. So a couple days a week, I actually work at an Ibogaine aftercare clinic. So for those of you guys who don't know what Ibogaine is, it's actually an extract of the Ibogo root from Africa. And it was originally used in the Bwiti tribe for PTSD, but basically it's a psychedelic, and it's known as, ayahuasca is known as like the grandmother, Iboga is known as the grandfather. But the miraculous thing about this is that when you take this root bark, it actually kills withdrawals to heavy drugs such as like heroin, meth, you know, pretty much anything. So it's pretty amazing. So I work with people after they've taken it and after they're withdrawal free. And I'm basically like a health nutrition coach. I teach movement, and I'm there on site with the clients 2 days a week. We do very holistic practices. So we take people to like Lakota Sweat Lodge. I actually just got done with that earlier tonight, which was really cool. We had some clients over there. So that's one of my jobs. My other job is I'm a movement coach. I teach hand balancing and handstands. So on my days free, I do that. And actually I'm working on writing a book and kind of just taking actually all the tools in addiction recovery, like, the tools from AA. There's different models like Smart Recovery. Some people like to use plant medicine. Some people are religious, and just kind of taking the tools that everyone used and then kind of open sourcing that. So I have a podcast that I'm working on, and then a community group that I started in town for that. And as well, I do a little bit of life coaching too.
Yeah, awesome. So your average week is jam-packed by the sounds of it. Pretty cool.
It's totally jam-packed with tons of forms of movement. I mean, I'm just kind of a junkie for all of it. The martial arts, a rock climber, like the hand balancing, yoga stuff, dance. So yeah, my days are pretty full.
And I have to admit, for those people that are listening, when I first came across Justen, I think he was upside down doing a handstand on some mats or doing some really cool movements. So this, if you want to see somebody who can actually move their body in unique ways, yeah, Justen's definitely someone who can do that. That was awesome. So I want to go back to the role you're working in at the moment, 2 days a week, where you're helping with the addiction recovery. So what got you there? What got you to be helping people with this recovery?
Well, I struggled with addiction for a long time. For about 5 years, I was pretty deep into drugs and alcohol. And, it took a lot for me to claw myself out of that. And one of the biggest tools that I used was actually, I took Ibogaine myself. And then it was a whole crazy story. I ended up stranded on an island in the Bahamas afterwards for like 5 days, living in a yoga ashram.
Let's not just brush over that. I think maybe we need to talk about this story. I'm just going to hit pause right there, and I want to go back.
Sure, totally.
Okay. So you were struggling. Let's not glaze over this story, because I think there are people out there who either have loved ones or potentially themselves are in some form of addictive natures or addictive cycles. So how did you come across this plant medicine as a way, and what made you decide to go and do that? I'm sorry, I'm taking it down another road.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. So I guess I'd like to start with, my addiction, towards the end of it, I found that the hardest part was kind of like, I was using for a long time, and I was definitely an addict, but it was like when I tried to quit for the first time, after actually losing, I lost, I think it was a weird month, and I'd lost 5 of my dear friends in that month. And, it totally changed my perspective on the whole partying thing and everything like that. So, it's like, I saw what happened to my friends, and I thought that would be enough for me to quit. And then, actually when I started to try to quit and then couldn't, that's when a lot more shame and guilt actually got attached to it. And then, me trying to quit, not being able to quit, actually started eating away at me more. And then my using got a lot worse. And basically I went on a trip with my uncle, and he was also a really bad alcoholic. I didn't really know how bad at the time, but, we were on this trip to Las Vegas together. And I remember I woke up one night, and then I looked over, and he was just covered in blood. And so I start freaking out, and I start trying to clean up all the blood off him. And I'm thinking, it looked like it was coming from his nose. So I'm thinking he probably maybe just got a gushing bloody nose, and the alcohol, thins your blood. So maybe he was just bleeding from there. Turned out, I guess his esophagus ruptured, and he was having internal bleeding, and he fell into a coma. And then that was basically a 6-month process of me, basically living by his bedside and watching him, kind of fade in and out of consciousness. And he passed away. And, I had to see what that did to my mom, her brother, and my grandma, who was, his mother. And, after that, I was like, this is it. I'm done. I don't want to live this lifestyle anymore. And after that, I still couldn't quit. And then this is where I started to think there was something wrong with me. I really started to get down on myself, and there was just so much shame and depression, and I just wanted to shut down and not deal with anything anymore. And I just felt so overwhelmed, and I was crazy, getting these crazy panic attacks, and I just didn't know how to deal with the anxiety. And I was looking at different rehabs, different places, and all the rehabs I went to, it seemed like it seemed like none of the people there were like really living a happy life. Like maybe they were clean, but it's like they weren't living the fulfilled life that I was searching for. So it's like, I didn't even want to shoot for that. And plus they're charging like, you know, $30,000-$40,000 a month. So anyway, I was listening to a podcast, and I think this was with Joe Rogan and Aubrey Marcus. And they were talking about Iboga and the Iboga root, and basically like how it can kill withdrawals, how it has this reprogramming effect where it's like deep with when you're in this trip, it's like you have to be really real with yourself, and you're able to identify a lot of the things, a lot of the, you know, under the surface things that you wouldn't necessarily even know they were there, like traumas, stuff like that. And you know, I was talking to my mom about it. I had like 2 or 3 days clean at the time, and that was kind of a lot for me then. And I was like, I need to go on this island and try this medicine. You know, I was basically getting to a pretty rough state myself as far as my usage goes. Like I was pretty sure I was going to die pretty soon regardless. So I decided to go for it. I bought a one-way ticket to the Bahamas to a clinic where they give you some crazy root bark, and I just kind of flew out there.
Yep. All right. So you fly out to the Bahamas and you land, and you've got this mission, you know, this is it. It's either this or I'm going to end up dead anyway. So you go through the process of cleansing yourself with the Iboga root, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that experience like?
Wow. It is definitely like nothing I've ever experienced before. And I've definitely, you know, I've delved into definitely a few different psychedelics. You know, I'm decently experienced. I wouldn't say I've done all the psychedelics, but I've done a good amount, but nothing nearly as harsh as Iboga. So basically what happened is, you know, I eat this root bark. They give you like a bunch, like I think it was like 18 like horse pills basically of this root bark, and you take them, and then you lose control of your arms and legs. So you basically paralyzed. You become so light sensitive you can't see. So you're blindfolded, and you're just like this limp corpse, and you're basically going through a manifestation of your worst fears and your deepest truths. And it's really intense. I remember in the beginning of my trip, basically I'd had this fear, like with my anxiety, that there was something, I guess, wrong with my heart. And there was me in one room, and then there was one other person in the clinic, and he was in another room, and we were both getting treatment at the same time. And I remember like the manifestation of this fear of something going on with my heart started coming out, and it started coming out in the form of like me like hearing voices and hearing weird things going on in the other room. And I basically, I guess I was imagining, but it seemed so real. But the guy in the other room was basically like, I was imagining that like he was going through like heart failure, and that like they were bringing in defibrillators and hitting him with them. And I was like hearing all this vividly going on. Meanwhile, my practitioner is telling me nothing weird's going on. Like it's all good. So I'm in this place in my head where I'm like, oh my gosh, like either I'm going completely crazy or I'm in a terrible place right now. And either way just sounds really bad. So I remember basically like I told my practitioner to kind of help me up to go to the bathroom. And as I was like walking over to the bathroom, I pushed the door in because I didn't trust my practitioner, and I wanted to see what was going on in there, to the other room. And I saw that the other guy was just laying sound asleep in his bed. And I realized at that point that like my hallucinations were literally undifferential from reality. So everything that I was going to experience from here on out was like, I was not going to be able to tell whatsoever if it was real or if it was not. And it was pretty terrifying. So after that, I went through basically a series of trips where I would kind of like drop into these weird trances, and I would be fully hallucinating, and I was going through just like reel after reel of my worst fears. And these were everything from basically like being hung from hooks and being skinned alive to watching my parents and family members burn to death. And it was really, really intense. You know, actually, I remember I came to at one point, and they started popping Valium into my mouth because I guess my heart rate was going off the charts. And this is actually a medicine where you actually have to be medically supervised the whole time. So you have to have heart rate monitor, blood pressure monitor on.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I was going to ask you, do you have someone with you the whole time? Because it sounds very full on and very intense. So you've got somebody there. It's not like just some outback place where they're giving you these pills and leaving you to suffer. You're being monitored the entire time.
You know, that's how it's supposed to be. And see, this is where stuff got off the rails. And actually, some of my manifestations of like some of my worst fears were actually coming into fruition in real life too, which kind of added to, I guess, the heft of my trip. So basically, like halfway through, about like 12 or 13, 14 hours in, I don't really remember. Time kind of is a whole nother thing at this point. But I came to at one point, and I look over, and my blood pressure monitor was on way too tight. So my whole arm was completely purple. And I was tripping out because I looked around and there was no one there. Like, I guess my provider had completely left the building, and it was just me. So I had to like unstrap my monitor on and fix my whole vital things like while I was tripping. And you know, I basically still, without the control of my arms and legs, I was looking for someone to help me, and I ended up crawling around the whole house on my arms and legs, and I was completely alone after that. So that was actually really scary and a little bit irresponsible on the side of my provider. So that was another crazy little aspect. I don't even know if we went over last time.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that. Yeah, so I remember you telling me about, and you started mentioning this, how you ended up in a canoe in the Caribbean. So let's fast forward to that, because that's where I cut you off. I said, "Oh, hang on a minute. Let's just get the bit of background around this." So
Yeah, so totally. So the end of I guess fast forwarding towards kind of the end of my trip, basically after I'd gone through kind of like that nightmare phase, there was like a reprogramming phase. And that was really interesting. It was like almost like I could see myself like I was in a computer program, and I was almost like able to see my stats like on the sides. Like self-confidence was like a 6, and I could like rewrite that to a 10. And I was like physically in this game, like reprogramming myself. And that was totally wild. And then after that, I went through another phase in my trip where I was like physically fighting the demons and the entities and stuff that were deep in me. And I was, it was really weird, but I was like, you know, slaying dragons and all these weird things metaphorically, but also physically. And then I kind of came to after all that, and I felt like very, very strong and very powerful coming out of my trip. And then instantly, you know, I got like really, really scared. And there's this thing, I guess it's called the gray day, where it's like after you come out of this 24 to 36 hour long Iboga trip, you can't sleep for about the next like 12 to 24 hours. And before you can sleep, like obviously when you sleep is when your mind starts to actually wrap its head around all this stuff. And, you know, before that, you're kind of just a jumbled mess of all these memories and stuff that you have to deal with. So, you know, I'm basically, you know, I remember I was walking through the house and I saw a fork, and all of a sudden my hand just started shaking. And it was like anything that I saw, whether it was like a fork or a knife or a piece of metal, I had this like, it was a crazy urge to kill myself or hurt someone else. And I think this was the biggest one of my fears, was that I could hurt someone that I loved, or I could do deep harm to myself. And it was really coming out full force, to the point where it was like, you know, if I saw cement on the ground, like I didn't want to die, but I almost could not resist the urge to bash my head into the cement until I was dead. So it was like this really, really weird place in my head. So I'm thinking, like, at this point, I'm like, what they gave me was not Iboga. They gave me some weird research chemical. They're trying to kill me. I guess this clinic, there was another one in Mexico beforehand. And they had actually gotten shut down because the place had gotten raided while people were actually under treatment. So people were actually kidnapped while they were on Iboga. And I heard about this story, and I think that was one of my fears, and it was kind of playing out here as well. So I'm over here, like, I'm like suicidal, and I don't know what's going on, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. I'm like trying to get on my phone at this point, and I'm just like outside pacing the beach because I'm so restless. I don't trust anyone. I don't want to be around anyone because I'm afraid that I'm going to harm them physically, because I just don't know what's going on with me right now. And it was really scary. So I'm like trying to call like an insane asylum, because I'm like, all right, I've obviously lost my mind. Someone needs to like lock me away, and I can't even like look at my phone, concentrate enough. My hands are like shaking. I can't even like do that. So what I did was I saw a decorative longboard, like a surfboard in the back, and I'm a surfer, and this was in the Bahamas, like right on the beach. And it hit me that like at this point, it was like the only noble thing I could do. Like I was either going to harm myself or I was going to harm someone else if I stayed there. And I was pretty sure I was going to die. And I thought the only noble thing I could do was to paddle out and basically like surrender myself to the ocean and like die at sea. So I took this board and I just started paddling out to the ocean. And luckily it had enough float on it so that I had my phone with me, and I put it right in the middle. And I got my mom, my sister, and my grandma all in the line, like the three people that I love the most. I told them like I was so sorry and that they should not blame themselves whatsoever, but like that this is going to be the day that I died. And I just wanted to know that I loved them. And I'm pretty far out at sea, like can basically not see the shoreline at this point. And I'm just telling him over and over, like, I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you guys so much. And I just felt so like, I felt, gosh, I just didn't want to let him down. And so I'm out there and I'm like, really like, I'm scared, but I'm not. It was a weird feeling. And I'm floating out there. And at this point, it had been about like 2.5, 3 hours that I'm floating out there on this board. I mean, I'm covered in burns, like sunburns from the ocean. And the clouds were just perfect. And I don't know if you've ever been to Bahamas before, but there are like tons of huge sea creatures out there that are just beautiful all over the coast. So I'm over there on the phone in the middle of the beautiful ocean, like looking down, seeing like giant crabs and shrimp and like weird creatures underneath me, and like and just telling the three people that I love the most in the world that I love them. And like I thought for a minute there that like, I was dead and that I was in heaven, and that's kind of like where I was going to be forever. And that was a really interesting place. So I kept going, and like I said before, like I was filled with almost like this like need to like hurt myself or like hurt someone else. Like it was like I was running off like this bloodlust almost. And after about like, I think it was like 4 hours of telling my family that I loved them, something switched in me, and I started like running off the power of love. And it was like this weird shift in energy where it was like all of a sudden I felt so much softer and calmer, and like my anxiety started to go away. And I still wonder to this day if I would have made it or not had I not been repeating that mantra over and over and over. But after that, like I started to get a little more clarity in my head, and my mom was like, you got to fight, like you got to find the shore, like you got to get back. And I just started paddling my ass off, and I saw the shoreline, and my phone is like almost dead, like totally filled with water. I don't even know how it was still working by this time, but I got to the shore, and I'm so dehydrated, and I'm like covered in blisters and burns like all over my feet. And I'm just like find like a paper cup on the beach, and I'm like running around to the Bohemian locals, like still without full use of my arms and legs. Like I must have looked like a crazy person, because I'm like walking around like a zombie, and asking anyone I can for just a little bit of water. And I ended up getting some hydration. And by this point, like I was just so exhausted. I didn't really know who I was. So I just started like walking that island, and I walked it for maybe like 20 30 miles. Like, I'm really not sure, but my feet were just bleeding afterwards. I finally found a hostel, and I fell asleep. And by the time I fell asleep, I didn't know what my name was. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what Ibogo was. But I got some sleep. I fell asleep. And I remember when I woke up, it was like the first breath of air. Like, I gasped for that air. It was like, and it was so weird because I'd never felt so refreshed in my life. Like, as soon as I woke up, it was like when I was asleep, my mind started to wrap its head around. Like, first, like, I had to acknowledge everything that I had not acknowledged before, which the Iboga helped bring out. And then when I was asleep, I guess I got to integrate some of that knowledge and even forget some of the harsher stuff in some of my trips. And I woke up, and I swear I felt like a 12-year-old kid. Like, I had so much energy. I had like it was really hard for me to look myself in the mirror for the longest time. Like, when I was going through my addiction, like, I looked into my eyes, and I saw like the empty shell of a human being. Like, it looked like I was looking into something soulless. And it was like instantly I looked into my eyes, and I saw a twinkle in my eyes, and I felt like self-love. And man, I can't even begin to imagine, like, to tell you like how grateful I am for that experience. But I came out of this just renewed, completely renewed, and all my withdrawals were completely gone, and still covered in burns and blisters, trapped on an island without my identification, any of that stuff. I mean, I felt better than I had since I was probably a little kid. Yeah, so it was pretty amazing.
That I could sit here and listen to your journey. It's just fascinating for someone like myself who, A, has never had an addiction, and B, has never had anything as intense as that happen to them either. And I think there is so much magic in some of the steps that you went through that, I'm going to say, the dark night of the soul. Like, when you were going through the darkest, like, one of the things that really stood out for me was when you said, you know, I was like I was playing a video game, and I could see my confidence there, and I could choose. It was almost like you were deciding who you're going to be when you get through this. Who am I going to, like, my confidence levels, you know what, I'm going to put that up. My ability to love, I'm going to put that up. My whatever it is, you were redesigning yourself.
I was literally in there reprogramming myself. And, you know, I didn't know this before I actually took it, but I've actually heard that Ibogaine is what they based the movie about the Limitless pill about, which is really interesting. And another really interesting fact about this is, after you take Ibogaine, which is, again, it's the extract of the Iboga root, so it's much stronger. But after you take it, there's this thing called Ibogaine, which is stored in your brain for the next 3 to 6 months after. And what Ibogaine does is actually it reintroduces GDNF, which hasn't been present since you've been like an adolescent.
For our listeners, what's GDNF?
GDNF, basically it radically increases your neuroplasticity. Okay. So your ability to build new neural pathways. So it's a great, like, after you get out of this experience, like, your brain is like much more malleable, and you actually have the ability to, if you wanted to build new patterns, build a new lifestyle, you know, all this stuff, you're actually going to be learning at a faster rate and more easily able to, like, you know, apply these concepts and stuff like that. So that's one of the main reasons why I believe in this so much. And I work with people right after their experiences, because, like, you know, I want to nurture them. It's like you come out of this, like, with like baby Iboga brains. It's pretty,
yeah. So you've got, so this then takes us to where we went around, and we've come back to, you know, the 2 days a week, the work you're doing 2 days a week is you've been through that journey. So now you can help people at the other end. You're helping people at the other end to while they're in that malleable brain state, to rebuild the person they want to be without thinking about who they used to be. This is create a new version of you.
Exactly. It's like, let's hone in on, like, you know, first of all, like, some really basic life skills. Like, let's get you out there connected with nature. You know what I mean? Because that's a root for all of us. And then let's find some beautiful hobbies for you, and let's find a community and all that sort of, like, all the basic things in life that, you know, I feel like just people just don't focus on anymore. Like, I feel like everyone these days seems to be like a specialist. Like, they identify themselves with one certain task. Like, oh, I'm a writer, or, you know, I am, you know what I mean, a businessman or a salesman, or whatever it is. And that seems to be like the main point of their life. And I like to dial back and say, hey, before you're a specialist, let's focus on the general things in life that make people happy. You know what I mean? Finding love, like finding hobbies, having purpose, having good health, having a connection with your body, having a connection with your family, having a good mental relationship with yourself, being in a spirit of growth and self-development. You know what I mean? All these things that we kind of forget after, you know, once we're in this adult world and we have to make this money and base our identity off of certain things. So I really like to dial back and say, hey, let's think about your life as a whole and make that the main practice. And then whatever you want to add on top of that, we can, but it all crumbles unless we create this core base. So that's why we're called root recovery. It's like healing from the root. You know, it's the metaphor we like to use.
Yeah, I love it. And it's setting the foundations for a better, more fulfilled, you use these terms before, a fulfilled life. Like you thought before you didn't have a fulfilled life. Now you're helping people set those foundations. And if we were to build a house, if we build it on shaky foundations, that house is going to fall over. So you're helping.
Yeah, you could have the coolest house in the world, but if there's a shaky foundation, it's going to crumble eventually. Exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. So what the work you do with the Ibogo, is that the name of the clinic?
It's Ibogaine. I guess there's clinics. It's actually illegal right now in the United States. So they have to go outside, somewhere like U.S., Canada, Europe. I mean, not U.S., but Mexico, Canada, Europe, Bahamas, somewhere like that for treatment.
And then they come back to you guys, and you help them integrate back into a new version of their life. Yeah. So exactly. even though you're doing that there, the skills that you have and what you've learned through this whole process can also help people who don't suffer from addiction.
Absolutely. You know what I mean? And I see, you know, the problems that people have in addiction are almost, you know, I mean, they're super parallel to the problems that other people have just in life in general. And, you know, not to mention that also, you know, addiction and suicide and just like, you know, those things are a higher death rate in the United States now than, you know, car accidents. It's skyrocketing, and people are more unfulfilled than ever, you know, and that breaks down to a lot of different reasons, which I could go down to for a while, but yeah, I definitely.
Let's just riff on a couple of reasons. Okay. So you said you could have lots of reasons, yes. And I'm sure there are. So for you, let's talk about for you previous to going through the transformation and the recovery. What was missing from what do you believe was some of the key things that were missing from your life that had you feeling like you weren't living a fulfilled life? So then you went to fill that missing chalice with drugs, alcohol, or whatever it was. So what do you think are the key things now looking back that were missing?
Well, you know, I actually remember basically to a T when my addiction started. And I was, you know, I was dating this girl at the time, and we were young. We were like 16, 17 when we started dating, and I made it like my whole life to make her happy. And so she dealt with depression, suicidal tendencies, like all that sort of stuff. And I remember one day, basically, she was like tried to kill herself like in front of me, and she grabbed like a kitchen knife and she was gonna stab herself. And she'd always had this like sick fantasy of like wanting to know what it felt like when if she'd like to be stabbed. You know, she used to have a history of cutting herself a lot. And basically she tried to like pick up this knife and go for it, and I stopped her mid swing and I wrestled her to the ground. And I had to pin her to the ground and obviously fight the knife out of her hand. And then I had her just held down by her wrists, and you know, I couldn't let her up because I couldn't let her go for the knife again because I cared about her so much. But she had a history of, you know, sexual abuse and all that sort of stuff, and she basically started having like a PTSD episode when I was on top of her, and she started looking at me like I was a rapist. And I remember her eyes, like, you know what I mean? She was so scared of me in this moment, but I obviously couldn't let her up. And she was screaming, and my whole apartment complex could hear, and I had to hold her down there for like 30, 45 minutes of that. And I remember, you know, there was just a part of me that died inside in that moment. And then I started drinking really, really heavily after that. And that was kind of the root of my addiction. But I guess even going past that, if you're going to simplify this, I mean, it would be not taking care of myself and putting everyone else first, you know, always. And it's just, you know, it's how I grew up, coming from like a very traditional, strict Asian household. It was like you always do everything for everyone else. You know what I mean? And it's your responsibility to take care of the people that you love and make sure they're happy and make sure they get theirs. But I wasn't nurturing myself at all. I completely stopped taking care of myself, and then worrying about my own growth or my own goals or the things that would fulfill me. And I think you know, in forgetting those things, I completely forgot who I was. I forgot my sense of identity. I didn't know what my purpose on this world was anymore. I started getting sucked into I guess like a lot of like social media and stuff like that too, and all these external stimuluses, which kind of like hit your brain with a hit of dopamine, you know, and then you just start craving more, and then you start you know, getting all these neurochemicals that you should from other areas, from like weird outside sources, and it just became this mixed jumble of just like, I just didn't know who I was. You know, I was just all mixed up.
Yeah. So the big piece for you, by the sounds of it, is just that identity and just knowing who you are. And I think the key point you said there was you were neglecting yourself.
Absolutely.
In favor of others. And I think that's a really beautiful piece of wisdom for all of us, because a lot of us can be I'll use the term rescuer, and that might make you giggle from some stuff that we've done together. But, you know, where we go through our lives trying to help other people and we forget about ourselves. And I use this analogy a lot, and it's when we get on an aeroplane and they tell you, you know, put the oxygen mask on yourself before you can help.
Yeah, I love that one too.
So, yeah, and I think that was the piece that was missing from you. You weren't getting the oxygen of life. So that's one of the key things that were leaving you feeling unfulfilled. And for our listeners or people watching the YouTube playback of this, is to have a think about yourself. What, you know, are you really fulfilling the things that you want in your life, or are you doing things based on what you think other people want for you, or what the rules are that other people have set for you as well? So if you were to give some people some tips, some people that are listening, on how to potentially, you know, fill up themselves and start building those foundations, whether they've got an addiction or not, it's not about going and you know, having an experience like you did. What do you think are some of the key things? What would be some tips for somebody to start filling up those empty buckets?
I think one of the main things is to have purpose in your life, and to find purpose. And you know, that comes in like many different shapes and forms for everyone. And it can often be like really hard to find a place to start here. You know, that's actually the thing that I find the hardest for people in addiction recovery, is like, what is my new purpose? Like, what do I do with all this energy? Like, you know, and it's, gosh, it's tough. But I think the best thing that you can do is to just jump in and dive into a bunch of different things, like anything that you've been interested in. What I did personally was, I realized that when I was younger, when I was a kid, there was a bunch of stuff that I always wanted to do, that because of basically my own mindset, the way I was raised with my father. Like, I never thought I was good enough for anything, so I never tried. You know, therefore I never accomplished any of those things. So I started like dating back to like, what would 5-year-old me have wanted? What would 10-year-old me have wanted? Like, what can I do to nurture the spirit child inside of me? And how can I learn to play again? and I use that as a basis.
Yeah.
And that for me was like my North Star.
Yeah. I love what you're saying there. The key for me was the trying thing. So just get curious and try a few things, the things that you've always wanted to do, and to see if you actually like it or not. So a lot of people struggle with finding their purpose, and you've just said, well, hang on, it's not going to be this lightning bolt. Go and try some things, and you might find something that really makes you come alive. Well, then go down that, discover it, go a bit deeper and see where it takes you. So I love that. That is that's a piece of gold for anyone listening who's struggling, potentially in a career where they're feeling stuck or bored, in a relationship feeling stuck or bored, or a business that's not going anywhere. Maybe it's time to shoot down some different rabbit holes and try something else. Yeah, I love that. Great. Any other tips?
Man, I think that, you know, one of the hardest things for me was like, I was searching, like, I need to find balance in my life. You know, that was like something I always knew that I needed to do, but was like super hard for me. I always was one to go like way overboard. And, you know, it's one of those things that everyone knows. Everyone knows, if you ask anyone, like, is it better to be balanced or go way overboard? It's like, everyone's going to say, be balanced. You know what I mean? And one of the best tools for me was actually when I started using yoga as a tool in my recovery. And when I actually started getting deep into arm balances and starting getting into handstands specifically, something clicked for me. Where it was like, once I was able to take one of these lessons that I knew I needed to learn, like balance, and start actually learning about it in a very physical way where I'm balancing myself. After a certain point, by diving into the micro of that, in this specific area, something clicked, and it's like all of a sudden I understood the universal law of balance. And then I started seeking balance in all the other aspects of my life once that clicked. So I think, you know, if there's something that you know that you need to learn, that if you can take that and apply it to the physical body and pattern it enough so that you can embody that trait, that you can actually apply it to all other aspects of your life too.
Yeah,
so,
I love that.
Yeah, that would be my...
That's a beautiful gift. Just the whole thing there around balance, because I used to say, you know, balance is quite a hard thing for a lot of people. Maybe start integrating different things into your life. But what you've said there is just, it's like, for me, it's just gone, right? So if we look at us doing a handstand, balance is really, really important. So therefore, yes, life is going to require some balance. You can't stand up if you're not balanced. You can't walk if you're not balanced. Life is about balance. So I love that tip around, if there's something that you want in life, see if you can embody it in your body first. And I'm just going to share something that I started last week. I decided I did what you said. I went back to what was one of my childhood dreams that I never fulfilled. And as a kid, we used to go away and we used to go camping. And at the place we camped, they had they weren't quite Olympic-sized trampolines, but they were big trampolines, the really old school ones. So I'm not going to tell you how old I was, but it was a long time ago. And you probably weren't even born when I was bouncing on the trampolines. And I used to bounce on them and watch people doing these aerial backflips. And I used to be just in awe, and I go, I'd love to do that. Never did it. So I've signed up, and last week I had my first lesson of learning how to do a backflip. Now, if I take that metaphor from you, one of the things that have probably held me back is this ability to fly high in life. So if I start flying high, if I think I can do this in a backflip, well, therefore, potentially that's going to help me soar a lot higher in my endeavors as well. So I love what you've just said.
That's amazing, by the way. I love that. And that was actually one of my things too, is that I'm learning too, is how to backflip.
Yeah. Oh, cool. We'll be able to compare notes, because I've only had my first lesson and it was hilarious. I really, seriously, if the listeners want to see some funny and seeing me just going backwards into these foam mats without actually getting any air, it's hilarious. But we're not here to talk about me and my backflip journey. We're here to get some more insights from Justen. So where to now for you? What's next?
What's next is, wow. So, you know, while I was kind of in my recovery, I started picking up tons and tons of hobbies. And obviously that Ibogaine was going on. So I felt like I was learning at a very accelerated rate. And I also started expanding my movement practice from just yoga I had this feeling like I was sleeping in this bed. There was like a box, like driving in this car, there was a box, to go into this room, there was a box, and put this mat shaped like a box on the ground and move in like, 90-degree angles. And I just felt so like, I was just so tired of living the box life, and so wanted to more like wiggle freely into my practice. So I got rid of the yoga mat, and I started training. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ido Portal, but I started doing Portal style movement training. And basically this type of training, I mean, it increases your proprioception, your spatial awareness, your mobility, your basically just like all these sorts of things. And I realized that when you start training in this way, where you enhance your perception, like it actually also increases your neuroplasticity as well. So I had the neuroplasticity from the Ibogaine and from the movement training all at once. And I felt like I was picking up things faster than I ever have in my entire life. Like even when I was a kid, like it was crazy. And people in my jujitsu classes were noticing. They were like, "Oh my gosh, you've only been training for 3 months. Like I thought you were a blue belt," And I was like, "No, like I'm just really into it," And so my next endeavor is after I kind of, help out with the whole recovery thing, and I'm writing a book. And once I get that all put out there, I want to start a movement research center and start studying the effects on like what happens exactly neurologically when we start expanding, like how expanding our body can help us expand our mind, and doing research on that.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And I'm going to sit down and watch this space as that unfolds, because I'm really curious, because I'm noticing with my own journey of moving into movement more so, because I didn't move a lot, and then I realized I should start moving a lot more, and maybe I need to get something that's going to switch on that neuroplasticity really quickly. I'm noticing that it's actually something that a lot of us miss in our lives. So that is awesome. Can't wait to see what comes out of that over the coming months or years, or however long it takes for that. So that's awesome. So I'm going to finish up here, and a couple of questions, my final 2 questions. The first one is, if people want to get hold of you for some form of coaching, advice, to go through any of your programs, or whatever it is, what's the best way? How would you like them to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. You could definitely send me an email at justin.rootrecovery@gmail.com. And Justen is spelled Justen, root, ROOT, recovery, just spelled the normal way, @gmail.com. And you can feel free to reach out there. And I'll also send you a link to my podcast as well. So, if they want to check that out. Yeah. And I have a Facebook group we can send a link out to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll put those in the show notes for people who want to get on board and follow you, because it's really amazing, intriguing, inspiring stuff that you're doing. And seriously, I just think there's so much gold. We've only scratched the surface in some of the things that you've been able to go to do. And hats off to on taking that journey into the Bahamas and really going deep and rewriting, creating a clean slate and writing a new life for yourself. That's awesome. And I think we can all do it. And it may not mean we have to go to the Bahamas to do it. I think there's other ways. And I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier is that you're pulling together a lot of information from all the different recovery processes. So potentially there are ways that we can do that from trauma or addiction and so forth. So I think you'll be a great person to follow for our listeners who are interested. And my final question is, and I know I've already asked you for some tips, what's the one thing you'd love to leave our listeners with?
Gosh, I'm just, I guess this is more geared toward the addiction recovery stuff, but we just started talking about movement. And, I've just had this idea recently that this body, like this vessel was the only thing that we were born on the earth with. So that there alone is enough for me to search out, figure out how it's wired, how I'm going to use this thing, how I can be in better connection with it, much more than me seeking out external things like a new car, new house, new whatever. So I think that's one of the things I want to just share with people is to just highlight the fact that this body was the only thing we were put on this planet with. So I think movement is completely overlooked. Like, people are like, your mind is what's going to last, your body is going to deteriorate. But the two, mind, body, and spirit, are all interlocked and all one thing. So I would love people to get more into movement and more in tune with their own bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a beautiful piece of advice. And I know that was something I neglected for a long time. I did pay a lot of attention to the mind, and it's only been in the last probably 3 years that the body's got to look in. And I wish I'd done it sooner.
Interesting. Just to add something onto that, I've actually been going through a Rolfing process, like a full structural integration process with a body worker. And, I've worked through tons of my traumas in my mind, but actually when like someone's doing like massage work, like deep massage work on certain areas, I realized that like I would be reliving traumatic experiences once those tissues got broken up, and actually that a lot of my traumas were embedded into my neuromuscular system. And my next level of healing is basically till I can basically break down all those physical blockages until like I can sit down with like the looseness of a child in the splits. And I think I just want people to be aware that like, a lot of these traumas are in here, but they're also embedded in our bodies too. Yeah. And we also heal through body work and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, really, great tip, because a lot of people don't realize that we don't know a lot about the mind, but what I've come to believe is the mind is in every cell of our body. So if we've got unfinished business anywhere in the body's going to store it over time, and it will cause distress, it will cause disease, it'll cause breakdown, soreness. So being able to move through those and release them is another way. You don't need to go to the Bahamas, right? You can just do some really serious body work as part of the process.
Oh, completely. Yeah. No, I definitely would not recommend I mean, for some people, maybe it's the way to go, but it's kind of like a last resort, last ditch effort. I think there's other beautiful ways to heal, and by no means plant medicine is the only one.
Yeah, and I think from your experience, you've gone down so many rabbit holes, and you're starting to discover that there are other ways. And thank goodness that you did do that, because it was a last ditch for you, and you're here now, and sounds like you're on purpose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the main things was like, obviously, in thinking that I was basically in being sure that I was going to die that day. I think coming out of that, I just have so much gratitude, and my standard for life basically changed to where now it's like if I go for it and there's like a breath of fresh air, like I am so grateful, and that's like my new standard for happiness.
Yeah. Such a wise person. And listeners, if you are wanting to get some of the wisdom, please reach out to Justen, follow him, find him on social media, wherever it might be. But Justen, thank you so much for jumping on and sharing your story. You did, share with us some really deeply personal information, and I really appreciate that. And I trust that there's people that are listening that needed to hear that story. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Alice in Wonderland. Justen Lee, wow, what an amazing story. But here's the thing that I want to make sure you take away from this. You don't need to go to the Bahamas to live that fulfilled life and to reprogram your mind and your brain and to have a clean slate. There are so many other ways you can do that, and Justen mentioned a number of them. And I really encourage you to reach out, have a look into the work that he is doing. Or if you have any questions and want to know a little bit more of how we can reprogram ourselves without ending up in the middle of the ocean on a surfboard, thinking that this is the last day of our lives, there are ways we can do that without the dark night of the soul, without the drama and without the trauma. So Justen is an amazing person, amazing story, got some great insights around the body, mind and spirit and movement in particular. So please reach out to him, or if you'd like to reach out to myself, feel free to do that too. Thank you once again for staying with me, and as always, stay curious.
Today is turning into the most curious adventure I've ever had.